Famine is the mark of a failed society. Amartya Sen. In the autumn of 1845, Ireland's countryside was covered in bright green potato plants. For over 200 years, this South American crop had thrived in Ireland's rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. It was packed with carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals, making it an affordable, nutrient-rich food. For many working-class families, it was the foundation of survival. By the mid-19th century, potatoes had replaced other staple foods. British policies ensured that Ireland's most valuable agricultural products, like grain and livestock, were exported. As a result, nearly half of the country's 8.5 million residents relied almost entirely on potatoes for sustenance. Then came the harvest of 1845. Farmers unearthed their crops only to find them blackened, shriveled, and rotting. Those who ate them suffered severe stomach pain. Some even died. Today, we know the cause was Phytophthora infestans, a fungal pathogen that thrived in the unusually damp weather. But at the time, people simply called it the blight. The fungus likely originated in the Americas, traveling across the Atlantic on cargo ships. While it devastated potato harvests across Europe, wealthier nations managed to avoid large-scale famine. They had other food sources and financial resources to fall back on. Ireland, however, was in a uniquely vulnerable position. In the country's poorest regions, particularly in the south and west, entire communities depended on a single crop. When that crop failed, so did everything else. Food shortages hit the most impoverished families hardest. But while the blight created a crisis, the government's response turned it into a catastrophe. For centuries, Ireland had been under English rule. By 1845, it was officially part of the United Kingdom, with its government based in London. During the famine's first year, British officials imported corn from North America and introduced public works programs to provide employment. But these efforts were deeply flawed. The imported corn was difficult to distribute and lacked the nutrients needed to sustain people suffering from malnutrition. Those already weakened by hunger became even more vulnerable to disease. Infant and maternal mortality rates soared. At the same time, British authorities continued exporting Irish grain and livestock, depriving the starving population of alternative food sources. Public works programs also placed further strain on the suffering. Workers endured long hours of manual labor, often traveling great distances for little pay. Many collapsed from exhaustion and hunger. One tragic case was Thomas Malone. Every day, he walked 18 kilometers to and from work. One evening, too weak to continue, he collapsed just short of his doorstep. He never made it home. He left behind a wife and 6 children. Despite the hardships, some families barely managed to survive. But in 1846, the blight returned with even greater force. Nearly 75% of Ireland's potato crop was lost. British relief efforts, already inadequate, dwindled further. International aid arrived, but it was nowhere near enough to meet the massive need. As the famine worsened, the British government tightened restrictions on who could receive aid. Incredibly, they forced Ireland to fund its own relief efforts by increasing local taxes. This led to mass evictions, forcing thousands of starving families from their homes. Most modern historians attribute these disastrous policies to a toxic mix of economic ideology, political negligence, and prejudice. British newspapers depicted the Irish as lazy, irresponsible, and prone to drinking. Some government officials believed the famine was divine punishment for these supposed moral failings. Others saw it as an opportunity to reshape Ireland's economy by reducing its population. Political rivalries further delayed any meaningful intervention. As with food shortages today, the issue wasn't a lack of resources. It was a lack of political will. By 1852, after 7 years of devastation, Ireland's weather stabilized, and the potato crop recovered. But the damage was irreversible. Over 1 million people had perished from starvation, disease, and malnutrition. Another 1 to 2 million immigrated, beginning a mass exodus that would continue for decades. By the 1920s, Ireland's population had dropped to half of what it had been before the famine. Today, climate change is intensifying extreme weather, putting agricultural communities around the world at risk of similar disasters. Just as in 19th century Ireland, it is often those living on the margins who suffer the most, facing food shortages, malnutrition, and displacement due to conditions beyond their control. But history does not have to repeat itself. Governments and institutions can learn from the past. Relief efforts must be swift, sustained, and rooted in compassion rather than indifference. Because in times of crisis, food is not just a necessity, it is survival. For more videos, please like and subscribe.